Timothy Greenfield-Sanders has achieved critical acclaim, photographing world leaders and major cultural figures, including presidents, writers, artists, actors, and musicians. His photographs are in many permanent museum collections, including the Museum of Modern Art, the National Portrait Gallery, the Whitney Museum, and the Museum of Fine Arts, Houston, and the Brooklyn Museum. And he is with us today on Reelblack podcast to discuss his latest project, the film, Toni Morrison, The Pieces I Am.
My grandfather bragged all the time that he had read the Bible, and it was illegal in his life to read. Ultimately, I knew that words have power.
I wanted as many people who could hear my voice to understand the importance of her work. Get people to trust that, oh, this is something safe, and then, bam, hit them with Toni Morrison.
This seems like a culmination, I mean, in some ways inevitable, that you would be doing a feature film on Toni Morrison, of all people. Can you tell folks, and congratulations, and tell folks how this came about?
I first met Toni Morrison in 1981, 38 years ago. She came into my studio in the East Village. I was a young photographer starting out, and I did her portrait for the Soho News cover, and we became friends at that moment. She was smoking a pipe, and very confident person. As a photographer, you can sense nervousness in a subject, and Toni was just fully ready to go and didn't need me to, make her feel any better. She was just ready and right there with me.
So, and then it evolved to the blacklist, or?
Well, I became her photographer of choice, and I started to do book covers, and we became friends over the years, and that developed to the point. To jump forward to 2005, we were in my studio here in New York, gotten much bigger and nicer over the years. And Toni was doing, had written the libretto for the opera Margaret Gardner. And I was doing pictures of some of the cast. And she suggested we do a book on Black divas. And that idea morphed into The Blacklist, which was the first of my 9 films on identity. The Blacklist 1, 2, and 3, Latino list, the Out list, the Trans list, the Women's list. All of it came from Toni. And she was the first to sit for it as well.
And I thought it was incredible because, one, to honor someone as great as Toni Morrison. And then secondly, just as an artist, as someone who makes film, struggles with a lot of the same issues, and not being tremendously familiar with Toni Morrison, I said, wow, this really resonates within every fiber of my being, what this woman is about. I guess subconsciously we all see the same needs, and her approach to addressing some of these issues in terms of making legitimate art, bringing a voice to the canon, and so forth. It just hit home for me. So I have to thank you for sharing that. What was your intention in terms of putting this film together?
I think to honor Toni, to if I was able to show the friend that I knew so well, show her the way I see her. And I think that comes through in the film. She's very open, and this is someone who is a private person who doesn't do biographies, doesn't write an autobiography, but she somehow allowed me to make this film. And you were talking about her being an inspiration. She's particularly an inspiration to artists. There's a lot of fine art in the film from people like, Aaron Douglas and Rashid Johnson and Lorna Simpson and Kara Walker, Kerry James Marshall. All of these artists gave us images to use in the film with they were happy to give them to us. They wanted to do something to pay back Toni Morrison, who's done so much for them.
Fantastic. Now, having known her for as long as you have, were there any discoveries that you made in the process of doing this portrait?
Yes, you're when you're friends with someone, you don't really research them. You don't know all of the details of the great accomplishments. You go to dinner and you do photo shoots and you hang out sometimes and you go to events. But I wasn't as familiar with the Random House years, the tremendous accomplishment that Toni made there, bringing all kinds of Black women, in particular, writers to the very white establishment building. Getting authors published that weren't in the forefront. She brought them to the forefront. So I knew a little bit about it. I wasn't aware of the extent of the accomplishment.
So was there a moment where she reveals something and you said, wow, like I can't, or you just have that comfort, that level of comfort with her?
No, I think it's more in the research. That when you start to really look into all the books that she edited and the artists that she brought in, Toni Cade Bambara and Angela Davis and Muhammad Ali, all those kind of people that she got published there, and she is a monumental figure that means so much to people. It's hard to express that. I think the film shows it, but it took 2 hours there to kind of paint the picture.
And that leads into my next curiosity in terms of your craft. Toni Morrison, she tends to tap more into imagination to create her worlds. Yours is more reflective of things, but I think that all artists, there's a moment where it has to become a piece of them for it to be represented. I mean, what is your stylistic approach in doing a portrait film, specifically this one, and at what moment does it galvanize for you, this is the story?
I was very conscious of kind of my own white male gaze. Toni talks about the white male gaze a lot. And she calls it the master narrative that's kind of constructed by the white establishment. So I was very conscious of that myself. I brought in a lot of people to kind of keep it, who could kind of talk back to me and keep it on the right road. But on top of that, I structured the film so that Toni is looking at the camera and telling her story. And the other interviewees are looking off camera and kind of secondary to her. And I wanted it to be Toni and Toni's story. And I think it was very effective the way that worked. You really felt she was talking right to you.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. Well, but that's sort of your signature with the Black list and the Latino list. And
it is, except that here I combined the two. I'm used to direct to camera, which I love. But I didn't want to have everyone direct to camera because in a way, it made it all too much that they're all on the same level. Instead, it's only Toni who's talking direct to camera.
And how much time do you spend? Is this all in one sitting that you get this information?
No, it's a good question. We started the film really with Toni. We went to her and set up a studio at her house and did a couple days of interviews and then interviewed everyone else and then went back to her to fill in some of the questions and to amplify on some of the answers of other people.
Right, and shout out to Sister Sonia Sanchez, who's here in Philadelphia.
Marvelous. Oh, yeah. One of the most amazing women and amazing artists around, and such an influence herself.
Without question. And there's a great documentary that's been done on her. I mean, there's certainly no shortage of documentaries that can be done on anybody. And one thing I always try to put across, I mean, especially you approach things with such simplicity. It almost begs that everyone should go out and make films about people in this respect. I mean, what words of advice can you give to fellow and future artists in terms of approaching their craft?
I make my portraiture looks very simple, but it's actually not simple at all. It's very hard to get someone to be himself or herself, their self in front of a camera. And I've been doing that for a long time. So I bring that sensibility to filmmaking. I'm able to make my interviewees feel comfortable in front of the camera and open and trusting. And this film is a very intricate, heavily researched film that feels like it's just enjoyable. You don't feel like it's 2 hours long. It feels like I want more. And that's the hardest thing to do. My advice is to people that luckily equipment is very cheap now, pretty much. You can make films. YouTube is a great place. There's all kinds of opportunities. And I encourage people to do it. I think you can. I know of films that were made on iPhones that are amazing.
I don't know where this woman's energy came from to raise 2 kids, to bring other people of color to the party, and also write these novels.
Toni was an editor at Random House.
Navigating a white male world was not threatening. It wasn't even interesting. I was more interesting than they were. And I wasn't afraid to show it.
Well, I'm very grateful to her for letting me make this film. It's Toni's 88 now, and these kind of things slip by if you don't jump on them. And I was so fortunate that it all came together, and here we are with this film, out in theaters, and I'm very blessed by it. Toni's work is about humanity and the power that she's able to convey the power of her writing, the musicality of her writing, the poetry of her writing is something that is just breathtaking. And, as a fine art, as an artist, as a photographer or filmmaker, I try to bring out the best in people. My portraiture is I wouldn't say it's flattering, but it's somewhere a mix between realism and beauty. And I try and see the better side of people. It's difficult in this world today with so much horror, in Washington and elsewhere. But I still try and see that, and I think that's what comes through in the List films, and certainly in the Toni Morrison film.
Without question, and you did an excellent job. I mean, very enlightening for me, very empowering for me, and just grateful that you've used your art, your talent, to illuminate so many great voices in allowing us to reveal their own truth.